Welcome back for part two of this. We don't have the fake names yet. You know, our editors create the fake names. So we don't know the fake names of this guest, but this is some fake male dentist here. Or he's not fail, he's just fake, it's just mystery. And so he is in the middle of his acquisition. He just bought it about a month ago. And if you didn't listen to last week's episode, pause it, go back to last week's where we talk about part one about his decision between, do I make this in-between office, kind of in between a 1 or 2 doctor office? Do I make it a full-blown 2 doctor office, or do I kind of scale it back down to a 1 doctor office? And so we really talked to him about that. And, kind of the conclusion that Matt and I both agreed on was that this is more of a 2 doctor office that just needs to be grown into. And so in this week's episode, it's a little bit longer, but we talk about a lot of the metrics and I guess the issues in his office that are kind of things for him to look at and for him to do to really get to that, vision of a 2 doctor productive office where then he can work less and have the office still be working while he's not there and kind of sustain his lifestyle. So I'm excited for today's episode. Matt, do you have anything to say before we hop in?
I just want to say, George, I think you really shined in this part. And I think our audience is in for a treat right now because some of the stuff you pointed out and recommended, I was like, whoa, that's pretty nice. So,
well, I think one thing that will ring true throughout the whole episode is this really reminds me of my practice. And it's not very common for me to see a new acquisition that reminds me of my office. But this one really did. And so it was really enjoyable for me to sort of like know, I'm a year ahead of him in this whole journey. And so for me, and I think the pace of which I've attempted to do things, I think that year is more like 2, so I think I'm really like 2 ownership years of stuff ahead of him in this journey. Alrighty, we're beginning the second part of our episode with this new doc who, he's not a new doc, but he's a new-ish practice owner. He's been in this office, a little recap from last episode. He's been in this office for about, since the beginning of this year. So we're in about August, so 8 months-ish. And he bought the office a month ago. And so now he is really looking at, we were talking in the last episode in part 1 of this about, is he a solo or a group practice? And we really explored that topic. And we got off air. I gave him the shared practices dashboard that we're going to go over in the second part of this episode. And I really want him to sort of, he told me, I think, a real gem off air. And I wanted him to repeat that on air so that you guys could hear it. So go for it.
Yeah, it's just the whole idea of solo doc doing tons of production versus, multi-doc associate kind of model. It's something that the broker that was involved in this deal actually brought up. He said that really that's the most, that would be the better way to go. But it didn't feel like it was a choice that I had because everybody else, including my accountants and a lot of the previous shows on shared practices, it seemed like really the single doc, as productive as possible model is really the only way to be productive, successful in the long term. So it's nice to hear another perspective because it didn't feel like I had a choice. I only had that one option. So it's nice to hear that there's another route that could lead to success and maybe be less stressful and more sustainable over time.
So that exact comment right there, I in the first part, I was a little bit skeptical. I'm like, am I leading this guy down a path that he doesn't truly want? Am I trying to put my bias on you? And the second you said that was, to me, was the light bulb moment where I thought, okay, I actually think that this is what's right for him. And I think we sort of, all of us who were involved in giving you that idea sort of pigeonholed you in this box where you felt like that was, and so you're trying to fit this office in this box where it doesn't fit. And it was causing stress, because you kind of, I think you kind of, did you feel like deep down you knew that it was just a big change from what the practice is right now?
For sure. And actually the staff kind of was feeling that strain. I could tell because I'm like, all right now, each doctor was only running 1 treatment column with 1 assistant. I was like, all right, well, I've got to start getting used to the idea of multiple treatment columns plus the 2 or even 3 hygiene checks. So I'm going to start pushing for that kind of scheduling, and my office manager is, I remember the first day we did a day like that where I had double booked, 2 column schedule. And she came to me at the end of the day and she was like, so how did that go for you? And I was like, oh, I'm happy, you know, I'm so busy. And she's like, well, I don't think your assistants are too impressed because they were stressed out of their minds, you know, and everybody stayed late that day and like nobody was happy, you know, so it was interesting.
That's
Whereas,
Go ahead.
you know, before, you know, each doc running one column, like the owner, he has a really decent salary. He doesn't kill himself. He goes and does an amalgam filling and comes back and reads his book. You know, he's not super productive, but he has a decent lifestyle and a decent salary. So um, it's just, yeah, you really do have to find that place where everybody's happy, including, you know, most importantly, you, the owner. But
And so I just want to compare and contrast real quick. I just sort of thought just came to my mind. I mean, he had an associate before you, and then he had
yeah,
you. How many associates has he had in his career?
in the 20 plus years he's been here, hard to say because he actually at one point was a really big office. Uh, I think he had like 4 docs in here at one point and a team of 20 plus people. But during the recession, he really shrank. So if I had to guess, he's probably gone through, I don't know, 10 associates over his career.
So that's like sort of your biggest fear, right? Like all this kinds of associate turnover. But this
Sure.
guy's, is he in the 70s?
No, he's 60s.
So he's in his 60s and he's still working and he wants to work a couple more years and he's had 10 associates. So I think the amount of stress and toll that that's taken on him, I mean, it seems like he's kind of made it to his career and he takes it easy and he works well. You know, like I think that idea that that's super stressful, I mean, he seems to have managed it just fine. I mean, am I wrong or has he talked about how miserable that was?
His biggest miseries in his career have come because, like I said, he, I think, grew pretty fast in the early part of this office and was doing fine for a few years. This was like, you know, late 90s when he started. And then 2008 came around and he stayed big. He didn't adjust fast enough. And so he had this really big overhead, very low production all of a sudden. And it really, really killed him. So he's actually not in the greatest retirement position in my mind. But the last several years have been very stable, which is why, you know, bought the office. But so it's hard to compare his career with what I hope will be my career.
Yeah, and you know, I would like to think that through a metrics-based practice, that's sort of, in my mind, the real big benefit and belief of metrics-based thinking and practicing is that you prevent that type of default, you know, just fall in your practice because you predict it, you stay on top of things, and it doesn't happen. And so that,
Right.
you know, that's the type of thing where if you're going to go down the road of, you know, having the group practice, staying on top of your metrics and making sure that your key performance indicators are performing well, will keep you at that size. Because what happens is, and so I guess the first thing I'll share with you about this office is it's on a decline. And so it might not feel like it to you because production is going up, but in terms of its patient base size, you're actually hemorrhaging. Not a ton, but there is a net loss of patients every given month. And that's the type of thing that could have easily been, you know, that's the type of thing that causes that decline is, you know, a lack of, and in this case, it's not necessarily retention. So when I look at, so we have your dashboard here. If you go down to your, the hygiene tab, if you go down to your hygiene tab and you look at your 3 hygienists, and for everybody in the show notes, their names will be, you know, omitted. But you'll see your hygienists, their reappointment rates are in the 90s. And when I looked month over month in the past, you know, your reappointment rates have stayed very high. And so your hygienists are reappointing their patients, which is sort of your first step in retention is the patient here and are they booking their next appointment? And in your case, you guys are in the almost in the 90th percentile nationally. So this is an office that reappoints very, very well. If you go down to the second category, or if you go down a little bit, you'll see your recall current percentage.
Yep.
And so 65% of your patients are current on their recare. And that is, we like to see it right about 2/3. So when I look at your office, I see a very stable patient base that is, you know, very retentive and are staying up to date on their cleanings, very regular visits. But you still have about 27% of your patients are overdue for a cleaning. So it could be scheduled today. Now, 6.8% are not on any form of recare, and that's very normal, right? You have a patient come in for an emergency, they're not going to get a cleaning, and they're probably not going to come back. Like there is some percentage of that. That also puts you, the fact that it's only less than 7% also puts you in the top 10% of the country. So when I look at this office, I'm actually fairly impressed. Initially you reached out, I was kind of like, it seems like they're doing pretty good. The patient base that they have right there is staying, but due to your size, you guys only see like less than 20 new patients a month. Does that sound about right?
The last couple of months, that's been true.
Before then, was it more?
More like 20 to 30 a month.
So 20 to 30 a month. I think that right there is the biggest reason why you guys are losing patients at your size. It's just your new patient flow isn't quite enough to really keep your practice size constant. So there is a very net a net loss, but it's not huge. So in the last 12 months, you guys have lost 523 people and you've gotten 289 new people. So
I see that.
If you look at a given year, that's what, 232. So about 20 patients a month right now are being lost from the practice as a net.
And it's kind of been this nagging feeling that I had that was going on, but it's nice to actually have that data, because I thought like 20 to 30 new patients a month, that's like pretty good. I feel good about that.
Yeah.
But I did have this feeling like I think we're probably losing stuff out the back door, and I don't really know that. It's hard to know that.
So it's just but like right now, if I look at it, so you're losing about 45 new patients or 45 existing patients a month out the back door. Yeah. And you got 20 to 30 new patients a month coming in through the front door. So that right there is your net 20. And when I look at it, you guys are reappointing great, which is just telling me that there's a lack of reactivation and follow-up. And it's sort of a front desk systems issue. And, it's really easily correctable. But it's just that type of the fact that the seller has gone on this way for the last 20 years without being aware of that type of issue is probably why that stress came in and probably why that practice declined.
Sure.
So looking at your office based on your goals, it seems like the most important thing is building up. If I look at the things that are going to make a group practice successful, it's really all of the things that have nothing to do with you. So your front desk systems, your hygiene department, your retention are really the big things. And so the most encouraging thing I see in this is that 90+% of your patients are reappointing with your hygienists. And sure, you have a temp hygienist who didn't reappoint great, but that's pretty expected.
Sure.
But so to me, that is your safeguard against associate turnover. If you have associates leaving, my guess is 20 patients a month are not going to leave because of a change of doctor. That's like a very drastic amount of people getting upset at a new person. But 20 patients a month are leaving because of operational inefficiency. And that to me is so I bought a practice and it was almost the exact same situation. We were at 40 out and 20 in. And so now we've sort of reversed those numbers. Now we're getting 60 to 70 in and we're losing about 15. So we went from like a net loss of 40 losing to 15 losing, and then we went from 20 in to 60 to 70 in. So it's that type of difference that will then get you towards stability, where you can afford to have associates turning over and not have it affect your practice. It's just that fixing those systems protects you against associate turnover, because I would have less patients leaving from a new associate than I would from operational inefficiency.
Yeah, I like it.
The other thing that I was very encouraged by was if you look down at the very bottom of your dashboard, your AR. So whoever is in charge of collecting, and you're a little bit overstaffed up front probably, but it shows in its ability that you guys collect well. So that's a big thing that is really important in a group practice, because your margins are slim when you pay associates and have larger overhead. You guys collect very, very well. And so I think that was one thing that I looked at the practice. And I think the big thing that I saw was just the retention and the new patient flow, that equation not adding up. But I feel like everything else, the bones are there to have a really stable practice. I mean, your hygienists are very productive. What do your hygienists make in an hour?
Let's see, 38 and 42 respectively, I think.
Yeah, so they're doing well above 3 times their pay, and so for you, hygiene, based on your insurance reimbursements, hygiene is something that will scale well with you. And so, I really think that your practice has all the bones to be what will be a fantastic group practice. It just needs to be transitioned appropriately. And so one thing I did want to ask you about, though, was treatment planning. So diagnostically speaking, can you elaborate on the differences between you and your seller?
Yeah, definitely I'm more proactive than he is. He'll watch straight up carries, I think, sometimes. And I don't think he's doing it intentionally. I just think it's like this old philosophy, whereas I'll diagnose small cavities, I'll diagnose perio disease based on what I think is current standards, and they do resist diagnosing periodontitis a lot, and he'll leave big old fillings that are cracking, and he'll just say, yeah, they're fine. Well, like, he just lets stuff break before he'll fix it, basically.
Okay. So the biggest issue you're going to have is, let's just fast forward 2 years, right? Let's just say we've grown the practice a bit. You kind of have some net patients in, out, but your seller, but you get an associate, and all of a sudden what we typically see with an associate is that you, the owner, will diagnose a lot more than the associate on average. And you, the owner, will have better case acceptance than the associate on average. So do you feel like the seller is like very conservative to the point where, like, I mean, because he's obviously done pretty well for himself, but is it mainly because of just the size of the practice as opposed to him as a diagnostician?
I think so. I think it's that. He's not. He's kind of passive in a lot of ways, actually, and I would say that extends to his diagnostics.
And so there's this, like, I guess, issue in the office where the hygienists are probably still assuming his treatment philosophy?
I think they're shifting because I've asked them directly to, but it's been a little bit of work. Like I really have to spar with them just a little bit. One in particular, she's pretty strong-headed and she's great, but like I really have to defend my philosophy well in order to get her to buy in. She'll just be like, yeah, well, it's a 5 millimeter pocket. Yes, it's bleeding, but it's not calculus related. So I'm not going to call it periodontitis. It's related to the margins, blah, blah, blah. Like we shouldn't diagnose it as periodontitis because then that patient has to pay for periodontal maintenance the rest of their life. She's really trying to look out for the finances of the patients a lot. And so that's been a little bit of a struggle. And
that's fine. An older hygienist?
No, she's actually my age. She's in her 30s. Yeah.
Okay. So,
interesting,
huh? And again, that's like on the grand scheme of things, I would say very solvable problem.
Sure.
I think it doesn't feel that way right now, but if I had to guess, I would say that that's something that would be weeded out pretty quickly. I guess my biggest thing looking at the situation is, the big shift in your practice is going to be at the 2-year mark, or whenever we call it 2 years, but it could be 3, it could be 4, it could be whenever. Sure. It's when you shift gears from your seller leaving to associate coming, and then you kind of cutting back. I think that's kind of how does that vision sound with you, though? I've sort of invented it, but is that something that would be what you're looking for?
Yeah, no, I love it. I do. I mean, just the idea of building this machine that's a little bit more automated and can run itself while I'm away from the practice. I mean, it's beautiful, actually. So.
I like that beautiful word. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Just because I have this like admiration for things that just run by themselves, so. And like you said, the other model, it's like you're really running yourself into the ground and it doesn't work without you at all, so.
And, your office manager, that's going to be a big player here. So tell me a little bit about your office manager right now.
I think she's really competent. Like, you gave credit to whoever's collecting. That's her. She's done, like you said, a great job of setting up collection systems. I mean, honestly, I don't know how she does what she does, and that's kind of one of my sources of stresses. But she's not a really effective team leader. Like, she's a great worker and very smart when it comes to insurance and collections. But when it comes to training other team members, she's really impatient. She's not a great teacher. And when it comes to change, she's very resistant. So those are my struggles with her. It used to be that there were just two people up front. It was a leaner machine. And the two of them, I guess, worked just so perfectly. And for years, it was that way. It was like 15 years. It was just the two of them up there. And then that one left and moved out of state. And so now she had to basically replace her with two people to feel like we could do the same amount of work. So she's been stressed out ever since that person left. And she didn't have to do any training, didn't have to do any teaching. They both just worked well, I guess. And now there's not that. So she's kind of being forced to step up as a leader, and I'm asking her to do that. But it's not something she's really enthusiastic about.
Give me an example of something you've asked her to do that would be like that stepping up as a leader role that she hasn't done very well.
Yeah. So like, she used to be in charge of paying bills. She used to be in charge of any marketing, which there wasn't a lot of marketing in the first place. She worked so many hats. And now, especially with that other second magical person gone, like she has to learn to delegate a lot of those tasks. I've actually forcefully taken some of those. I'm paying the bills. My wife is actually kind of taking on a lot of the marketing role. And I'm trying to clear her desk a little and then encourage her to clear her desk even more. I mean, if you walk in, literally her desk is full of piles of paper that she says is, organized somehow. But it's like I see her stressing out of her mind, working hard all day, and then I see my other front desk person, my financing coordinator, if we want to call her that, and she's just reading a book. And I'm like, it should be almost the opposite based on what I've heard like Kira Dent say, which is that the manager needs to really learn to work themselves out of a job. And I've told her exactly that. I would rather see her wondering what to do, not obviously reading a book, but like wondering what to do next because everybody else is working so efficiently.
So you have 3 front desk people.
That's hard to grasp, I guess. Yeah, 2.5. One is part-time, but yeah.
What is the part-time employee doing?
She comes in, she confirms appointments, schedules appointments. She's kind of our scheduler. She's the face you see when you walk in. Sometimes she's collecting money on the way out. Just depends on, who's doing what at the moment. But yeah, she's really our scheduler. The other person's like our treatment plan presenter, money collector on the way out. And then we have our office manager who's lately, through all this transition, she's really been kept busy by just trying to get like credentialing done. A lot of the logistics of this transition have fallen to her, and insurance companies are still giving her a really hard time, I guess.
Yeah, it's does she feel like a insurance coordinator who's in office manager's role?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my office manager. That's what she was when I walked in. The metrics that matter most, brought to you by Practice by Numbers. What gets measured gets improved. Legendary management consultant Peter Drucker said these words over 40 years ago, and they apply to the business of dentistry today more than ever. Practice by Numbers automates measuring the things that you want to improve in your practice. Tell us what you want to improve, and we will provide the tools to measure, track, and improve that metric and many more. The metrics that matter most hold the key to improving the success of your business. One of the most important metrics to track and review on at least a weekly basis is the treatment plan acceptance rate. Simply known, your current rate and looking at the patients that appointed and did not appoint is a great start. Discover and discuss why individuals did not appoint and be certain that follow-ups are assigned and tracked. Practice by Numbers has built-in task manager that helps scheduling coordinators follow up as needed. Notes related to all contacts are kept in a log that is easily accessible to coworkers. Managers and doctors receive a weekly report card showing the performance of the front office team as they work to fill the schedules. Accountability for the treatment acceptance in a dental office pays huge dividends. With our smart data software, accountability can be automated so that employees know their goals and can track their progress. We're often asked the question, who should present treatment? Practice by Numbers recommend training all team members, including doctors, hygienists, and assistants, to engage patients to discover what matters most to them. When the final treatment plan is presented to the patient, there should be no surprises, and it should reflect what is most important to the patient. When you discover what patient wants are, the only job left to do is give it to them. To learn more about using smart data to manage your dental practice, visit practicebynumbers.com. I keep talking about my practice because I can't help but feel like ours are super similar. And when I look at your numbers, it feels like my office. When I'm talking to you, it feels like my office. And yeah, I mean, it's tough because, for me, it was a lot of, I guess I'll put it this way. You have leadership challenges, right? If I look at what does the practice have to be like 2 years from now for you to have a smooth transition to your ideal life, it is really, you as a leader need to really run a show that's very organized. And that starts with an office manager who can delegate like you talked about. But then it also includes very competent, well-trained, and organized systems up front that the office manager can have the peace of mind to delegate to. My guess is if we asked her, why don't you delegate? It wouldn't be because I want to work myself into the ground. It would probably be because I don't trust that it's going to be done correctly.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. In fact, when I've tried to get her to delegate some of these things, she's like, well, our financing coordinator, she's not even doing her job right now correctly. So how can I hand off more to her when she's already doing the little bit that I've given her sloppily? So yeah, that is the struggle. Granted, both of those front desk people are new, so I don't know how much time and patience we give them before we really put a little more pressure on, devote more time to training. And so my strategy at the moment is we're changing the way we do team meetings for at least the next couple of months to having departmental meetings. So I'm going to take my manager to lunch. We'll talk about the struggles. Then we'll take the front desk to lunch. We'll talk about struggles and solutions, and I don't know.
I love that. I love it. Yeah. I do departmental meetings all the time, and it's so much more effective because there's very rarely something that, this could be like counterintuitive to everything else that anybody ever said, but in my opinion, like there's very rarely anything that I really want the whole team to talk about,
Sure.
It just is. And they need to know, but at the same time, problems need to be hashed out by department. So I like that, but I also think there needs to be some sort of, do you guys do like some sort of staff, like regular basis of a staff meeting?
A little morning huddle, but it's also not very well used in my mind. It's like rehashing the schedule, which we've all already looked at. We just kind of summarize it all. And so that could be better. Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out. Like how often to have a month, is like a monthly team meeting, or is morning huddles on a daily basis enough, or what? I don't know.
Yeah, and that's something that probably in the beginning you want more meetings, and then as we do bi-monthly now, which I like, but whenever something comes up, I'll just go talk to all my hygienists or all my front desk or all my assistants. But I guess the one thing that I see is kind of let's paint a picture of what the practice has to look like in 2 years to be the beast that can sustain the broken model of associates. And it really is a practice that is very organized. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do. The office manager is running the show and delegating, and your hygienists are following your treatment philosophy. And the schedule is being executed smoothly by assistants. And I think the one part, so we've already talked about the front. Your hygienists it sounds like they're coming around.
They really are, actually. I think being an associate for 6 months was really big, and like getting them to trust me. And they both have seen so many things break, so many big fillings break and people lose those teeth. And they both have seen these 5, and so point out, like, they get it. They get why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Good. And as time goes on, like 2 years from now, like that's a tough process to rush. They got to know, like, and trust you. They got to believe in you. And then it's just natural that they're going to think that's best. And I really see, now let's talk about the assistants for a second, because you talked about this one column scheduling. So are you guys currently scheduling out of one column?
The selling doc just does one column. I'm doing 2 now.
So I want you to go to the very top of our dashboard.
Okay.
So here I see your month-to-date projection. Do you see the projection?
I do.
And it's 147. And so that right there, if you look at that line, so I look at the top yellow line. So the good news is you guys are on a growth trajectory, because if you look at the previous lines, the dotted one right below that is last month. So you guys are ahead of last month's pace, and the one below that is last year. So you guys are well on growth trajectory, but it's at such a flat line. So when I look at that, what I'm seeing is, why are you beginning the month with so much production on the schedule and not finishing with way more than that? And my guess is that you guys are pretty far booked out. Is that accurate?
Yeah, hygiene's booked out 3 months or more, and I'm booked out like a month, I think.
Yeah, that's like. So let me kind of paint the picture as to why that's a problem. Do you feel like that's a problem first, or do you like the security of it?
Yeah, I mean, being a new owner, that feels great. Like, 'cause when I first got in here, I was like, oh man, people are dropping, like appointments are dropping, and next week my schedule's empty, you know? So it does feel nice to look a month ahead and be like, oh, well, we've got a full month of productive work to do.
So the way I see it is, let's just say, so your hygiene mix is about like 25%-ish of the practice. So let's see, let me get an exact number here so that I'm not talking out of my, you know what. So
keep it clean. You don't want that explicit rating.
Yeah, no, I do not want that explicit rating from Richard. So you guys are running at about 23% hygiene.
All right.
So when I put the 147 up here, that's like what you guys have already done and is on the schedule left for the rest of the month. So like if all the appointments are kept, you're doing 147. So really that's over $100,000 in treatment that you guys have scheduled this month.
Mm-hmm.
And then you already have an additional like $70,000 on for $81,000 on for next month.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I see it is that's like $150,000 of treatment that is just sitting there needing to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys are waiting to do it. So that's the issue I see with the doctor side. And what happens is you get somebody, you tell them they need a blank, and then they schedule their blank. We'll call it crown in this case, but it could be anything. And they're not going to do it for another month because, you know, you're so booked out. And now all of a sudden the crown is not as big of a priority. And so what you're going to find is you have a lot of cancellations happening. Maybe not a ton, but more than you would if they were being seen next week or the week after.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So what's going to happen is like you guys begin the month at about 130. You might peak around the 150 mark, you know, in terms of like what your projection will be, but then you'll always finish the month on a decline. So at the end of the month, your appointments will be dropping off, and then you'll always kind of finish at like a less than momentous ending.
Interesting.
Does that kind of sound like what's happening, or am I totally off?
I've never looked at it on a monthly basis, but certainly on a daily basis, like our projected daily production, what we actually anticipated happening.
So you guys
it does make some sense.
Always finish less than what you expect.
Right. And I always felt like, oh, it should be actually more. Like we find more work to do during a given day, and we have the ability to do it. So
that right there is like, so a couple issues, right? You're overbooked in hygiene. And so let's talk about the effect that's having. We've kind of talked about a net loss of patients. So if I'm a new patient, I'm calling your office, and this is August, I'm really excited and I'm finally going to go to the dentist and change my life. And I call to schedule an appointment, and you're booked out for 3 months for me to get a cleaning. You know, I have no relationship to your practice. I'm probably going to hang up and call somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So Rohit on By Practice by Numbers, he looked at my office, and at the time we were waiting for our 4th hygienist. And so our wait for a new patient was about 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me that that's the kiss of death. And that's what he called it, because
interesting.
Your momentum and your practice is driven by your ability to combat your lack of retention. And even if you fix your systems, you're still going to lose people. And so you need to be able to combat that by having a net gain. And that gives you the forgiveness and the stability to do what you want with your life in your office and not worry about what people are going to think. And you being booked out 3 months is really hurting that ability to see people.
Sure.
So,
and I've heard that from my office manager. Like I've exactly told her that thing. I'm like, oh, well, that's a good problem to have. And she's like, no, it's not.
It's not. It's a false stability, right? You're
Sure.
like, oh, I'm set for the next 2 months, right? Don't have to diagnose anything. But the reality is you could be doing a lot more. I mean, I'm assuming you could schedule a little bit more efficiently. I could be wrong, but you could potentially squeeze more in any given month because we got to alleviate the doctor side a little bit. But then also, I mean, you need to be able to grow your practice, and so those are a couple other issues I see. So I think you have leadership challenges where you have to grow as a leader to somebody who can lead a team of hygienists, lead a team of front desk people and an office manager, and then also a team of assistants who can handle a very busy schedule and not feel like they hate you at the end of the day, like you mentioned before.
Right. So do you feel, I mean, like, just pointed question, do you feel like I really should be thinking about expanding hygiene more at this point?
So you're booked out 3 months, 27% of your patients are still overdue for their cleaning, and you're not seeing enough new patients. So yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And again, I plugged my practice into software. First, it was a gut-wrenching feeling because I was a new grad checking for 2 hygienists.
Right.
And I had to sit there and say, shit, I need a third. And I do not want a third. And so, yeah, you need more hygiene and you need it badly. But before you can do that, you need a system to fill open hygiene spots because, one of the things that we didn't talk about on air, but you sort of sent me a message about was we're not filling our openings. And I'm assuming that those are happening in hygiene as well. Is that correct?
For sure. In fact, more in hygiene now than
the doctor side.
On my schedule anyway, yeah.
So you have the same thing happening on hygiene is happening on the doctor side where you have like this false sense of security and then they're sort of dropping off and you have no way of filling the holes.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, that just breeds to me a lack of front desk organization. I don't want you to feel bad about it. That's not the purpose of me pointing something out. You're a brand new owner. This is the perfect time for me to destroy the current situation so that it can be rebuilt in a way that's going to suit your lifestyle and your goals.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, looking at the metrics, I see that there's holes on both sides. And, this office is so close to doing so much more. And I think that's the cool part about the situation. And that's my favorite part about buying the right practice. Like, let's pat you on the back for a minute. Like, you bought the right office. This office is sitting here like ready to hit 2+ million and you're just sitting on it. And that's awesome. And you have the team in place. Like you seriously don't even have to hire that many people. So if I could trade my practice for yours at time of acquisitions, just based on statistics, I would. And I don't say that very often, but this one is really built to minus number of operatories. So 6 is a challenge. But, I think staggering hours and doing certain things shouldn't be a big deal. And I think at the end of the day, yeah, you have a practice that's really well built to grow and sustain a group practice model. You just have kind of holes to fix in each department. And that's really just your ability to be a leader. I think the one thing that's underestimated about this whole thing is, yeah, sure, I can look at the metrics, tell you what to do. Hey, make it happen. But the reality is people are doing it and people in your practice are doing it and they have to keep doing it well. And that is really, that's a whole leadership thing. So looking at it, those to me seem like your biggest areas. So if I want to get you to where you are right now, to where you need to be to have your ideal situation, then those are sort of the things that need to be done. Now, you sent me a list, and I asked for a list, which I'm happy about. So I kind of want to go back over the list. But before I do you have any thoughts?
No, it's super valuable and helpful information, actually. So please don't hesitate to point out the issues. I mean, that's definitely why I put my stuff out there for you to see. I definitely want that. So thank you.
So your chief complaints. Yep. So you kind of talked about the income of your patient base. It's a little bit lower than you were hoping for. Is that so? Kind of elaborate on that.
It didn't necessarily matter to me. Like I know a lot of people look for like upper middle class or even higher level income, but to me it didn't. I don't care if I'm doing cosmetics so much. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with cosmetics actually, so this fit me pretty well. Coming especially from a community health center, it's like a step up, So it didn't necessarily matter what their income was as long as they could get dentistry done that I can offer to them, But the challenge with it is that they are very hesitant to pay out of pocket for anything. And then my team, who also I think come from a similar income level and background, they really hate the idea of people paying out of pocket for stuff. So it's a little bit of a challenge when I'm suggesting, hey, this has value, what I'm offering to you, and it's worth the investment. But I'm getting kicked back from either a hygienist or an assistant because they don't want anybody to pay any money for anything.
And you guys are PPO only?
Yeah. I mean, we have some cash patients, but
yeah, but like no HMOs.
No, that's
so
right. Yeah.
Everyone's paying for dentistry. If they're getting a crown, it's 50% off for most people,
Right,
like that type of thing. Yeah. So again, I think that goes back to a leadership challenge, right? I think it's just changing the mindsets of your patients and your staff. And I don't think I don't think that's like but I kind of, so let's think of the flip side, right? I look at that and I kind of like it because too white collar of a practice is one that might not be easily handling associate turnover. So I think your office is well built, your patient base is well built for if your systems and your team can help people pay for things and help people see value in things before the dentist even walks into the room, then that's something that can be done without you. You don't need you to do that. You just need your staff, and that's your leadership. And so again, I don't think that's one that kind of fits. So we already talked about hygienists doing or a lack of perio diagnosis. We talked about your office manager. And so let's talk about your overhead.
Yep.
So you feel like, how do you feel about your overhead in general?
When I first got here, because of the situation with the front desk that I mentioned earlier, how it was just the two of them, and then that one like superstar left. I was just getting a lot of stress from both front and back, actually, that like everybody's stressed out. They needed more help. And I was really resilient. Like I did not want to come in and first thing hire 2 people. Mm-hmm. But I felt like I was going to lose people who'd been there for 15 years if I didn't get them a little bit more help. So I did. I was involved in those hires even as an associate. I hired 1 part-time front, one part-time back. Since that happened, I feel like, I wish we were leaner, But it's all just a gut feeling. I haven't really had enough history to analyze it that well.
Okay. So, yeah, and I think, again, your overhead, like, what would be your monthly overhead? Like, for me, I don't think of percentages very much because for me, every month, my staff and all my expenses are about the same. So I think more of a break-even number. Do you have an idea of what your break-even is?
I don't. No.
Okay, what's your overhead percentage?
George, I haven't even had a full month yet.
I know, but like the sellers historically.
Oh, his
you said 63%.
Yeah, something like that. I'm sorry, I don't have it memorized.
That's okay. I'll forgive you.
Yeah, thank you. I know you would have though. Like,
I'm good.
Right on top of your head.
I'm a freak. So I have 67,000 is sort of my estimate for his monthly expenses pre-acquisition.
Yeah.
So we got to throw on there your practice note.
I want to say it was more like 70. But
okay, let's say 70. Yep. So let's just throw on the practice load unknown. You're already in the 80s, and you haven't paid the seller yet. So for me, I think this is just another confirmation that the lean and mean model is not what's the most straightforward here. Yeah. I mean, you'd have to cut your overhead in essentially half.
Yeah.
And you have this huge practice note of like 12 to 13 grand a month or whatever it is, kind of weighing you down. I just don't see that as a very straightforward path. So again, I just think the growth will solve your problems, and you kind of have the growth waiting to happen. So for me, I really think it's just organizing the front desk, organizing your doctor scheduling, and then expanding your hygiene. And it's a game where, and here's the one thing I want to talk to you about before we really wrap up, is that expanding hygiene thing. So how do you feel if I were to tell you, hey, tomorrow, go ahead and your 2-day-a-week hygienist or your 1-day-a-week hygienist, let's make her full-time. How does that sound?
Yeah, scary, for sure.
Scary.
For a couple of reasons. Number one, it increases my overhead. Number two, like, I'm not super thrilled with her personality or clinical skills, actually. So for those 2 reasons, that's a little scary.
Okay, let's punt the clinical skills thing.
Sure.
I cannot. So yeah, if she's not the right fit, she's not the right fit.
Sure.
But what is her hourly pay?
Probably right around 38. I'd have to pull it up.
Okay, and that's okay. Let's just say 38.
Yep.
So do you remember the list? Can you go down to the hygiene area? I want you to sort of, we're not going to say name because we're on the show. It's anonymous. But you see here at the top, we sort of have, are you at the hygiene list? So the top one is your fill-in, and then which one is that?
Real quick.
first, second, or third after the fill-in at the top.
Give me 1 sec, because I don't know where that went. Her initials are LS.
Okay, perfect. So that is, for everyone listening and looking at the dashboard, that is the first hygienist listed after the fill-in. So I'll leave the fill-in available. That's not anybody's name. But then the second one is $158 an hour is her hourly production. So patient in the chair, she's doing $158 an hour. And that right now is your most productive hygienist. So I know that seems weird, but again, like, let's just throw it out. On average, your hygienists are doing about $150 an hour. So for you, what other expenses are you going to have with taking on an additional hygienist?
Not many.
None.
Yeah.
Your front desk is already there. Your building is already open. You already have an op for them. So you have no additional expenses taking on that extra hygienist.
True.
So they are like, let's just say $40 an hour. So they're doing like 3.7, 3.8 times their hourly pay.
Mm-hmm.
That means that for you to break even on that hygienist, you have to keep them busy 1/3 of the time.
Wow.
And I haven't even accounted all of the additional restorative work you're going to get from checking more exams.
Sure.
So I want that to be a mindset thing, because we're taking an office doing 1.3 and we're going to get it doing 2.5, right?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That'd be awesome. Cool. So now you bought the practice for $1 million. How much is it going to be worth at 2.5?
About 2.
Okay, let's just say 2.
Yeah.
So you just made $1 million. That's not free. You have to pay somewhere, somehow for that money. And it shows up in these little things. And so sort of when I'm coaching a client and I have to try to talk them into growing their hygiene department, there is going to be openings. I don't have the magic bullet to make you grow your hygiene department without openings. But the things I need you to realize are, A, your office is built in such that when your hygienist is seeing a patient, they're doing 3 to 4 times their pay. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to get an asset that's worth $1 million more than the asset you have now. So you need to pay something for that. And a little bit I would much rather pay, like, instead of buying a practice that's already there, that's an extra $1 million. I would much rather pay maybe a little bit higher staff overhead, but I'm still breaking even, making more money while doing this, but not being as efficient or as profitable as I could in the short term, to build a situation that's much more profitable, stable, and worth more in the long term. So that is one of those decisions that I'm not saying go 4 days of hygiene randomly, but I'm asking that question to bring out that fear of expanding hygiene. Every dentist has it. I had it. And I just brought on my 4th hygienist. Every day, she probably has 2 to 3 openings in her schedule. And we might start the day with a full schedule, but she'll get them. And it's sort of just you're investing in your practice, right? Your practice is now going from, what is it now, 9 hygiene days to 12 hygiene days. That's like you're trying to grow your practice 30% in that one move. So that's going to cost you something. And you're going to pay it in the form of wasted hygiene salary, but it's not going to cost you money in the long term or in the short term, because she's breaking even and you're going to be doing more treatment because of it.
Sure.
So that's the sort of, like, that's one example of the many mindset shifts that are required. So, like, we've talked about metrics, right? I'm done talking about metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And now I need to talk about mindset, because I think we're big on both. And it's the mindset really is, so we've talked about the metrics, we've talked about what needs to happen on a very logistical standpoint, but now for you, the owner, you need to have the vision, the ability to sort of stomach, like, that's a stomach lining thing. It's like when you're investing and they tell you that you need to, like, bear through the downturn to get the long-term benefit of investing. Like, it tests your stomach lining. Watching your hygienist have an opening between 10 and 1 is going to test your stomach lining. And you have to be prepared to have the long-term vision in mind to really be okay with that. And, dealing with your staff and on the leadership level and having organizational systems up front, a lot of stuff isn't going to go well. And you need to have that vision in mind to kind of get through that moment to get to where the practice will be a lot more smooth and stable. And so that's where the mindset needs to shift from, like, my issues are very small to I need to build something that doesn't need me. And so it is going to require me to be in a different role of leading my team to lead themselves. And that I think is because ultimately when you're gone, your team is still there. And so you might not be on the office, let's just say Monday, Friday, because that's my situation. But your team is still going to be there sort of running the show and more or less putting the associating in situations where they can be successful. And so that's really what I see for you is those are your areas of growth on a mindset level. Really thinking long-term and thinking about how am I going to get this practice from where it is today to where it is. You should not be thinking about anything this month. And right now you're probably thinking everything is this month and next month. Am I right?
Totally, yeah.
And so it needs to be a shift from this month to next year. And it's that shift, and your office manager is supposed to focus on this month because that's her job. But your job is to very much be always thinking about next year and the year after because that's the time that's going to matter. And the decisions you make today are going to impact next year more than they are going to impact this month.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's all I got for you.
Cool.
What are your initial thoughts and, kind of how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I've been craving this kind of data breakdown, and I have, they didn't have any sort of metric software in place, and I've been considering both, dental intel and practice by numbers. I'm getting ready to get one of them. And it's just cool how just a few pieces of data give you the courage to make those moves. Just pointing out the one break-even analysis on bringing on that hygienist full time, it suddenly does reinforce my stomach lining. Like, I could afford to have her here, not working, if it made long-term growth happen. So, pretty helpful.
Cool. And I think my hope is that you took away both. And I think the metrics and the mindset really go hand in hand. And I for our listeners out there, the fact that go back to the very top of the dashboard. There's two squiggly lines going straight. So the value of the metrics is taking that lines going straight and then understanding that your schedule's overbooked and you have a lot of last minute cancellations that you're not filling. And that to me is the real value of understanding your metrics in depth because you didn't tell me that. I mean, you did mention it, but it was really the projection lines where I knew that was happening. And it's just your ability to kind of ride your ship on that level from 10,000 feet and see what's happening on the ground floor. I just met you, and I think that to me is the real value. And, when people say metrics are not actionable, I couldn't disagree more. So,
but the interpretation of those metrics, that's where I think a lot of us are lacking understanding.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I'm not saying that it's obvious. I think it's something that, that's kind of the whole point of our coaching, to be honest, is really to help people drive the ship themselves. You don't need a coach forever. But I think in the short term, it helps to have that type of thing. So that's really, and I don't want anybody to feel bad for not understanding that. That's not the intention. I think the whole goal is with the show to start kind of highlighting those things for our listeners. And I think your practice was a really great example of, for me, I love group practice model and I love a team of hygienists. There's so many things about your practice that just really excite me on that level. And so it was really fun. I appreciate you coming on and letting me nerd out on your office. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, George, anytime. You're welcome. Either over the internet or in person to nerd out over my office.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, George.
All right, Matt. So I'm going to put you on the spot. First thing in the outro, you said this was an episode in which I shined. So I would like you to sort of take me from, I don't necessarily know exactly how yet. We haven't talked about this interview, but I guess I want to hear, but what are the things that stuck out to you on maybe some observations that I made?
We're going right into the praise, huh, George?
Yeah, I got to hear it.
That's fine. No, you really did shine in this episode. And I'm going to acknowledge him first because he did a great job of not taking anything personal. He wanted to hear all the feedback. He was encouraging it. And that's great. That mindset just shows how much he wants to grow and how he's willing to listen and hear other perspectives. So that's the ideal client you'd ever want.
Well, hold on. Before we get into it. So I don't know, my objective in doing this show is not to get clients, but it was after this interview, I told him I would love to coach you. It's just such a fun situation for me. And you're such a cool guy that, for me, if I had to cherry pick a client, it would totally be him. And so that's something that we started talking about after the show. And so that was exciting. But I think, I had that that was my gut feeling right after talking to him. Like we clicked pause. I'm like, I want to coach you, dude.
You seem pretty smitten over there, George.
No, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed this one. But anyway, carry on.
Yes. Okay. And then for you, you had a couple observations, one of which the mindset shift of being booked out over a month on doctor side, and how you could tell he thought that was great. Like, I'm booked out over a month. But then you pointed out, hey, there are some downsides for that. Patients book treatment out that far, their failure rate's going to be higher. So it's not necessarily a slam dunk thing like he thought it would be. And being overbooked in hygiene as well. Like, that's also not something you're really looking for. You're always looking for a point where you have more capacity in hygiene than you're able to fill, because you're getting the new patients, you're getting them in quick. And as everyone knows, like the way people make decisions, if it's on their mind, they'll do it. If it's the same day treatment, they're more likely to do it. If they schedule it out a month, they're not. I thought that was a really astute observation, and something I think a lot of new owners, don't quite have that mindset yet.
So I want to go back to, how did I know that? And I think for me, that's the power of practice by numbers. I looked at his projections and the very flat line across the month, which lets me know that he started and ended the month with about the same amount of production on the schedule, which is, so when he goes into a hygiene exam and presents treatment and that patient schedules, they're probably not getting on that month, because that's not affecting how much he has scheduled for the rest of that month. And so for me, that's something that you really have to keep an eye out. And, because that could have been a huge piece that's missed, is that he's at capacity in hygiene, especially, and that's where it's really hurting him. If he's going the group practice route, that new patient flow is incredibly important, and his retention is already great. So he just needs more patients in the door to offset the ones that are leaving.
Absolutely. And I think we mentioned it in last episode a little bit about models people hear about and then they kind of latch on, but it doesn't really fit their situation. One of which you pointed out, kind of the lean and mean model that he was attracted to, not really fitting the office he bought. He bought a bigger staffed, bigger ops, more doctor office. So like you reflected in the interview, the path to lean and mean is kind of messy in this case. It involves firing people, it involves changing hours, it involves, a lot of changes to the office that may be detrimental. So I think it's important for the listenership when they hear, these ideas like lean and mean, and it sounds attractive, but you got to figure out, does it fit your scenario? So
you have an issue with lean and mean. And so people on the show don't know that. I want to bring it to light. I personally have a huge issue with lean and mean as a person, right? Because for me, lean and mean, I hear dentist driven. And, I hear like, I don't have enough support around me, so I'm like hauling this whole thing. And that's just, my personality does not fit that type of ownership model. But I don't think I've ever asked you what your issue is with lean and mean, because I think it's something that we both get annoyed with when we hear it. What is your like objection to that type of practice?
Yeah. How much time we got here, George?
We got time. This has already been a long episode. They're already in for the long haul. Let's hear it, Matt.
No, I can't stand lean and mean. I think it's the dumbest concept in dentistry, really. I think it completely hinders growth. When you're so focused on keeping your costs down, you're not focused on the more important thing of growing the office. Like, it's scarcity. It's scarcity in a name. It's just another name for scarcity. It's like, I only really get it when it comes to a startup office. Like, you don't have any patients. You don't have like guarantees of income coming in the door. So you want to keep costs down in the beginning. I think it fits there. I think every other scenario, I think it's stupid, honestly. And that's totally my bias coming through, but it's one of the things I get fired up about.
Well, I think, Matt and I have talked a lot about his office, and I'm sure he loves me airing his stuff on air, but, we talk about adding a hygienist. I think in this interview, I kind of go through, this dentist is nervous about the same thing every dentist is nervous about when they add a hygienist of those openings. And that's like a very anti-lean and mean concept, right? You're bringing on an employee who's not fully booked. And is that kind of an example of where you think lean and mean would hinder growth?
Definitely. And that, I just aired my opinions on lean and mean, but I still had the resistance to adding the hygienist. So that's one way talking with you or talking with the coach can kind of point out, hey, you have this really strong opinion, but when it comes to your own office, you have resistance to adding some staff and having potentially overhead. that doesn't really fit. So I think after talking to you, I kind of realized, and as you point out in the episode, if a hygienist is producing 150 an hour, it only takes 2 or 3 patients for her to cover her salary. So if she's got a lot of openings, yeah, that's not ideal. But at the end of the day, she's paid for herself. And like you point out in the interview, that doesn't even account for the doctor production you could be doing from those exams. So it's like a whole different mindset shift. And I think is one of the most amazing things that you've realized early on in your ownership career that I think most dentists go through their career and never even realize that.
And I kind of wonder because, all the dentists say your hygienist has to produce 3 times their pay. And I'm with them on like a per hour basis. So, patient in the chair, 3 times their pay. I'm with you. But if I'm adding a hygienist, like what other expenses do I have? None. I'm just adding a hygienist. So I almost say they need to produce 1/3 their pay. You know what I mean? Because, that's about what it is. I mean, if you're busy 1/3 of the time, then you're pretty much breaking even, not even including all the extra diagnosis that you're doing. And so I don't know if I'm crazy or if I'm onto something because I don't hear anybody else talking about that. I hear everyone else talking about hygiene openings like they're the plague, but really that's a tool for growth. If you don't have any openings, then you're not growing and you're probably dying a little bit, And so
it's just such a common sense thing, It's like their salary's been covered, and then some with just a couple patients. Like it's just you don't think about it. You obviously did, but once you do, it's like a light bulb. It's like, oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah, and my staff. It was funny when I onboarded my first time adding a hygienist. They kind of looked at me like I was nuts. Why am I bringing on this person if they're not going to be busy? And then they saw within 6 to 9 months that person's really busy. And then you just every time you do it, it's going to happen, and that's just part of it. But then your practice is now like. I think your practice is if you have 2 hygienists, adding a 3rd, you're pretty much growing 40%. You're guaranteeing 40% growth. And the same way with, it's very proportional. More patients equals more, more everything. And so I think, I wish, and I'm going to sound like a broken record on the show because I'm probably going to tell I'm so far 2 for 2 on telling dentists I need another hygienist. So we'll see my field goal percentages as I do more of these. But for sure, I mean, that's just something I just through my own lens, I look at it that way. And it's been the best decision I ever made was hiring an extra hygienist.
Yeah. And it was very astute how you said that growth's not going to be free. Like you're going to pay a little bit for it in that first 6 to 9 months with the openings and with, them not being fully booked. Like there's a cost to this.
Yeah. And, he's trying to increase his net worth by $1 million, so that's going to be expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to get $1 million for free. You got to pay for it somehow. And so for me, I would much rather pay for it in a way that it's not really costing me anything because that employee is producing its cost. But, if you could pay for it another way, I don't know. But for me, that's always made a lot of sense.
Yeah. And for him, I think it's such a mindset shift that it's something he's going to need regular check-ins with. I think a lot of what you brought up is things he wasn't considering. And it's kind of like anything else. If it's a totally new concept and you don't continually hear it and talk through it and discover it, you're not going to act on it. So I hope for his sake that he gets support through these things in some way because he could really take this office to like amazing heights.
And then I think the one thing that I want to touch on is leadership. I talked to him about his role as a leader, both in leading his office manager and leading his clinical team in diagnosing the way he wants it to be diagnosed. And that's a kind of a missing piece to this show a lot at the time. Not the show, but like this whole world of consulting is the importance of the leader in the practice, being the leader in the practice and having the ability to move their staff in the way that they need to move. And so I think that's a piece for him that's like the biggest benefit from coaching, in my opinion, is growing as a leader so that you can make the decisions that have to be made. And, there's nothing I got from my experience with Justin that was more valuable than that. And I think if I can give another dentist that, then it's going to help them out so much in their career because they can make the decisions that have to be made.
Yeah, and it's not like just a concept that they can understand. Like it takes time to develop that skill, and it comes through trial and error and through talking with someone who knows about it and has been there. It's not something you can look at a dashboard and see. There's no number for it. Like it's a tough thing to develop, and it does take time. And like you said, for me as well, was the best part about coaching, was developing that muscle and going through it and talking about things that worked and things that didn't work. And, you know, that's how we get better at anything.
You know, because there's going to be a lot of resistance. There always is, right? He's going to try to do something. He's going to get the resistance. And how you navigate that resistance and how you work through it is how you develop your leadership. And if there's no challenges, then there's no leadership. You know, I remember there was a time in my practice where I felt like things were going really well because I didn't ask my team to do very much. And every time I asked them to do more, that was when the challenge became. And that was when I grew as a leader to the point where I was better prepared for the next time I had to do something like that. And also, I think as a team, we became closer because we went through adversity together. And I think those are two, like, if you're going to do nothing different, then you don't really need to be a great leader. But once you start asking them to do things that they weren't doing before, that's when it's going to be challenging.
Yeah. My staff didn't all quit on me until I had that first team meeting and announced my new vision. And then they started quitting.
You know, but, you know, now you have your vision, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't change it.
Yeah. You have anything else to add, Matt?
I think the last thing I had was about PBN, how he said, I think it's just a few pieces of data that give you the courage to make the moves. And that was so powerful. It could be even like a PBN slogan, like the little data that gives you the confidence to make the moves. That's what PBN is. That's the value of numbers tracking software, just in one sentence.
Yeah, it's the, you know, I know I need this because of this. And so even when it doesn't go well, I can stand firm in that decision, you know? And I think it's the push you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rohit.
Yeah, seriously, what would we do without the software? Man. All right, guys. Well, I really enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you guys next week on Practice Underwater. Thanks for listening to another episode of Practice Underwater. We'll see you guys next week.
If you're interested in one-on-one coaching with either Dr. George Hariri or Dr. Matt Garino, our contact emails are in the show notes.
And if you're interested in being on Practice Underwater as a guest, where we can look at your practice anonymously, you can go ahead and contact the email in the show notes and follow those directions to get on the show. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next week on Practice Underwater.